here. I know some of you, so I'm also a parent in the district. I have a second grader at Allen Creek and 6th and 8th graders at Calkins. So it's fun to have this opportunity to be here as a parent and as a professional. So thanks to Sarah and Pat and Greta for inviting us to come talk with you. So I am going to start things off. So I'm the director of the Whole Child Connection at Children's Institute, and Melissa Heatley is here, and you've heard from her earlier in the fall, I think, when we were hoping that we wouldn't need another meeting like this, and is the director of Expanded School Mental Health Initiatives at URMC. So she's going to be kind of co-presenting with me. And I'll kind of walk you through what our agenda is for tonight and introduce you to my other colleagues while I do that. So we are going to talk for 30-ish minutes about some of these topics around sort of supporting your children's social emotional well-being, and Melissa's going to get into some additional resources for those who might be needing, a little more support. And hopefully it's a small enough group, we should have good time for Q&A. If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat. Andrea Bertucci from our team is going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll keep track of any questions. I probably won't see them because my screen sharing is on, but definitely, if things come up, please pop them in there. And then once we finish this first part, we'll get into some breakout groups, and everybody should have registered for a group in advance. We had a couple of groups that didn't have anyone sign up for them, so we ended up trying to just combine the groups. So we're going to have one group for parents and guardians who are supporting children of color and the additional challenges they are facing right now. And that's going to be led by my colleague Earl Green. And Earl, if you speak, I think you'll show up on people's screens if you just say hello and wave your hand. I think I saw you on there. He's waving. I think he's smiling. All right. And we're going to have one group for anyone that's sort of a connection group focused on preparing for the future in times of uncertainty, including supporting your own well-being. So Andrea and Dawn Brighton are going to be facilitating that group. So you guys can give a little wave. And Melissa's going to do one on stress management and supporting your children's well-being. And then also we'll touch on kind of accessing mental health resources. And then I'll focus on supporting our children's executive functioning skills. So we'll have those 4 breakouts at the end. If you changed your mind and the group you signed up for, now you're thinking you want to do a different one, if you just send Andrea a private chat, she'll pop you into a different group. So just let her know where you want to be if you think you don't like the one you originally signed up for. And so we should have time then for some small group conversation and connection around these topics. Okay. All right. So the way I wanted to start tonight is just talking about you. So we always, whenever we do a training or a workshop or anything with, we always have a warm welcome, and that's kind of to bring you into the space that you everybody on this call is doing 5 million things, I'm certain, and your day is ending, it's the end of the day, and you're probably thinking about dinner, and if your kids are in bed, and Melissa's worried her naked toddler is going to come in after a bath and run around in the room. So, we all have a million things that are kind of on our minds. And as parents, we're really good at asking our kids how they're doing and worrying about what they're up to and whether everybody else is okay, but we're not very good at thinking about ourselves. And so my question to you is, how are you? What is one word that best describes how you're feeling these days? So I'm going to ask you to think about that for 20 seconds and then pop it into the chat. And we'll get 20 or 30, however many people are on the call now, words in the chat. So just think about how you're feeling. What's one word that describes how you're feeling these days? And I'm gonna, if I can see that. So I'm seeing some themes. We've got some hopeful, burned out and hopeful, overwhelmed, uncertain, frustrated, exhausted, hopeful, persevering, overwhelmed is definitely a theme. Tired, exhausted, stressed, distracted, ready to get back to normal, spent and focused. So there's some contradictions in what people are saying. There's some multiple truths, and we're going to get into that in a minute. So, so thanks for sharing that. Okay. So this has been a year, right? There's been a lot going on. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Layla Saad, but I subscribe to her newsletter that she sends out. And this one came a few weeks ago. And she focuses on racial and social justice work. And so she was talking about this in the context of all that's going on in the country around that topic. But when I saw this, it just hit me that it felt very appropriate. This is a lot. Can we just sit with that this is a lot? And so I'm just going to read you a couple of lines from her newsletter that I felt were really helpful as I was thinking about how much is going on in the world with COVID and the continued uncertainty, and thinking about my kids and worrying about how they're doing, and thinking about my job and worrying about how that's going to go, going back to work, and thinking about just all the many things that are happening. So this is a lot. Can we just sit with that this is a lot? Not spiraling into hopelessness, but also not trying to fabricate a sense of shallow hope or toxic positivity. Mask the fact that this is all so very hard. The limbo that I am personally in is that my primary directive or North Star is trying to answer the question, how can I become a good ancestor? Not just when things are in flow and life is easy, but right now in these times, with these circumstances and these events. One thing I do believe is that we'll look different every day, every week or month or year, and for every person. Some days I'm able to channel the hope and inspiration that leaves me feeling that we can overcome and build a better world. Other days I'm in my grief and mourning for the ways we treat each other and the way we treat this planet. And some days like today, I'm just waiting for the guidance to come, not forcing, not pushing, not masking, just waiting and listening. So if you're feeling like I'm feeling, then I take comfort in knowing that we are in limbo together. I take deeper and longer breaths, knowing we are not alone. And I trust that in continuing to follow that North Star of becoming a good ancestor, we will find our way. So again, she's focusing on a specific area of what's going on, but I think it's an appropriate metaphor for all that people are kind of experiencing right now. And so I just leave you with that thought of, that we're in this together, trying to kind of muddle through a lot, and that's okay. And so again, the reason I'm focusing on you and the adults right now is because you can't, the whole, you got to put your oxygen mask on first metaphor, right? You cannot support your children if you are not feeling well. And so we saw from the chat that people are feeling a mixture. There's some hopefuls and optimistics, but there's also a lot of overwhelmed and exhausted. And that's really true, that there are multiple truths for individuals and for our community right now. So there's people who are feeling really optimistic, the vaccine, things, there's some hope that this is almost over, but there's also the negative, where is this going? There's news reports that, the vaccines aren't rolling out quite as quickly as we maybe thought. So maybe it's not going to be over quite as soon. Or, I've heard people say, I'm excited about getting back to social activities and I'm actually going to miss some aspects of quarantine. Is that weird? Am I really screwed up that I'm thinking that way? Because there are parts of it that we kind of embraced and felt good about. The community, the coziness with our families, maybe, some aspects of, some parents of teens saying, well, I had, control over my teens. I knew where they were all the time because they were home, and being afraid of letting that go. So there's sort of multiple truths going on. And for our community, if you're interacting with lots of different parents in the community, you might find that some are really comfortable with the vaccine and others are choosing not to get it. There might be people who've been working through all the way along through this pandemic and others who are working from home. Some parents are really comfortable with play dates and some are completely maintaining social distancing. And so that can be really complicated for children in those different contexts, and for parents trying to navigate relationships in the community. So it's important to understand all of those truths, to understand that change is really hard. It's challenging for all of us to think about, to do change. It's not in our nature. And we're still sitting in this uncertainty, and sort of recognizing that we're still in that uncertainty. That as parents in Pittsford, for anybody who has secondary children, we're on a week-to-week schedule. We're going to hear about whether school opens, right? And sort of wondering, okay, are we going to finally get the email that says, no, we're not going to open this year? So there's still this uncertainty that we've been living in for a very long time. And so that means you're grappling with your own feelings and you're worrying about the impact of all of it on your children. And so it's really important to name that and understand that those things are going on, and that you're in this context as well. And for many of us, we're also thinking about this broader society and the world and what's going on in many different ways. So again, wanting to focus a little bit on how you support yourself. We've all worked really hard to come up with some good self-care habits. So it's important, more important than ever, that we continue all of those right now. So maybe there's things you've done throughout this past year to kind of help yourself get better exercise, sleep more, eat well, meditate, yoga, connections with people over Zoom, whatever the things are that are really important for your self-care. It's important to continue those habits, to really stay focused. And also to name your truths. So those things that I just mentioned, those that there can be multiple truths, don't feel guilty for having the feelings you might be having. Really name them and allow yourself to be both optimistic and, a little concerned. And maybe write them down, maybe do some journaling to kind of name what those truths are for you so that you can really understand where you're coming from. And that's going to help you be better able to support your children. And then, lastly is really acknowledging and planning for transition. So we're kind of in this transitional phase. We've talked to a lot of people about how we're going through transition right now. So we are in this place where things are starting to be more open. More people are starting to get the vaccine and feel comfortable moving into new places. For many, we're starting to think about returning to our workplaces. So as we kind of go through that, I would say a really important mantra is to take it slow and to also think of it as a transition. So if you remember back to March, it took us a good chunk of time to get used to this quarantine, and it's going to take a good chunk of time to get used to coming out of it. So for those of you who might be starting to return to the office, think about it like a new job. If you were starting a new job, you would not plan much that week. You might get takeout a few nights. You might tell your kids, I'm going to be kind of distracted and grumpy this week, bear with me. You might skip your workout one day. Whatever the things are you would do in a new job, think of the transition back to your office the same way. As you think about social outings and maybe starting to move more into some social gatherings, take it slow. Plan one dinner, have one family over. I've talked to people who are exhausted after having a dinner, with just one other couple, because it feels so different and new, and it's tiring when you're not used to it. So giving yourself that time and space to plan, and even if it's something you used to do with ease, remembering that may not be how it goes this time. So really taking that time to kind of plan. And I think the same is going to be true for your children. So try something, and if you've been really active socially throughout the pandemic, this is different. If you've been going to work throughout the pandemic, that's different. So everybody's in these different phases, but even within the same household, you might have a spouse who's been in the office, but you've been home, or vice versa. So being aware of the impact of all of this on everybody in your household as well. If your children are starting to get more engaged in activities again, that they're going to be really tired, that you are going to be tired, that your spouse is going to be really tired. So paying attention to those things. All right, so that's a bit about you guys. So I wanted to just touch on this self-determination theory, and DC and Ryan are actually out of the University of Rochester. They came up with this theory around what children need to be motivated. And so one of the things that they really need is a sense of autonomy, feeling that they have some choice, that they have competence, that they can feel good at what they're doing, that they're mastering something and they're really being effective, and a sense of belonging or relatedness and connection, right? So those are three key factors that influence children's motivation. So what has COVID done to those three factors? For some kids, they've had way too much autonomy way too fast, right? So we're expecting middle and high school students to operate very much like college students in some cases, that they are having to be really responsible for their own learning. If your households are anything like mine, I'm downstairs in the basement on my computer on Zoom all day in meetings, and my 6th and 8th graders are upstairs managing their homework and their schoolwork, 3 days a week on their own pretty much. And I check in and I try and make sure they're on task and, see what their homework is like. But, they're having to do that very autonomously. And that's a lot of autonomy, and it's a little too much and too quick. And, for elementary school kids, for the younger kids, during the summer and then when things first shut down, they were spending a lot of time, playing alone or having to figure out how to entertain themselves in new ways. And then once they went back to school, it looked very different. They're eating lunch in their classrooms at their desks. They're having to be a little more independent and alone. There's a lot more alone time. So that autonomy piece has been really impacted. And then competence, similarly, they have all this autonomy without competence. So they don't have adults in scaffolding that success in the same way. They don't have as much interaction with their teachers to understand how effective they're being. And again, it looks different for the elementary kids. We've been very fortunate in our district that the elementary kids can be there full time, but there's some question, there's a lot less feedback from teachers and a lot less kind of understanding of how they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So the competence issue has been affected. And many kids are doing worse in school this year than they have in the past. So we've talked to a lot of middle school teachers who've said they've given out more Fs this year, not in Pittsford, but just in general, than they ever have in the past, that they're really seeing grades struggling, kids who were formerly really engaged, doing great in school, are really struggling with their grades. So that's a sense that affects the kids' competence if they're feeling like they aren't doing well in school and don't really know why necessarily, because they may not attribute it to, lack of engagement. And then of course, relatedness, connection, that is one of the massive things everybody's lost this year, is sort of that connection to family, connection to peers, all of that. There's been some places where we're much more connected as family with our immediate family, but that can also put a strain on relationships because there's an awful lot of time together. So you can think about where your children might fall on the spectrum, what you've noticed in terms of their needs, and where they might have had some impact on these things. So what are some ways you can support your children through this? One of the important things I think is to know your children, to really understand where they do fall on that spectrum. And so you may have children who are done with the pandemic, ready to move on. They're thinking of summer as kind of a cutoff point. This is over at summer, and then next school year, everything's going to be back to normal. I've got one of those in my household. This is going to be done by then. We're good. And then, there's other kids who may be feeling really withdrawn and scared about normal, who aren't really too sure about that. I've got one of those in my house too. So it's really important to understand where your kids are and then help them name their feelings. So really, you can do that through modeling how you're feeling, being really upfront. I'm feeling a little anxious today. Here's what happened. I have this presentation to do tonight to a bunch of parents. I'm feeling a little nervous about that. What do you do when you get nervous? Sort of helping them name their feelings. You can do a temperature check. Sometimes people have a whiteboard or bulletin board up in the house where, there's Post-its and everybody can just put, how they feel for the day. You can use smiley faces or feeling face cards. You can Google that. You'll find ones for younger kids to be able to name their feelings. For kids who are reluctant to talk, for teens, you can text. Sometimes just sending your kid a text, how are you feeling today? Even if you're in the same house, because that's how they're used to communicating. It gives you an opportunity to reach them at their level, or have a journal prompt and put it out on the table, for everybody to fill in. So there's different ways. Literature is really great for younger kids to be able to help them name their feelings, because sometimes it's easier to relate to a kid in a book than be able to say how you feel. But really getting kids to name their feelings. And then creating sort of a sense of autonomy, but supported autonomy. So allow them to control something at home. You might, help them find a recipe, or they get to choose dinner once a week. Every kid gets a choice of what the dinner is going to be. Or maybe there's some aspect of redecorating their room that they could be in charge of and choose, even if you don't necessarily love the color of paint they chose for their room. My daughter painted her room a dark green this summer, and we just went with it because she felt like she really wanted to redo her room. So, giving them some opportunity to make choices and have some private space. It's been a lot of together time, and for teens, especially who are trying to build their independence from their family, this has been a tough time for them. Celebrate success, make sure that you're reminding kids how much they've been able to accomplish this year, how difficult this is, and really that they're doing an amazing job at a lot of things. If the grades have dropped and then they're able to bring them up a little bit, just notice and celebrate all those little successes. Find ways to really make sure that they're having an opportunity to feel that kind of success. And you can highlight some of the new learning they've done. So children have learned a lot of stuff this year that is outside of school. Some kids are getting on YouTube and figuring out how to do new tech, new skills that they didn't have before. So make sure you're really celebrating all of those successes. Again, going slow and starting small with any kind of easing back into more activity if you've been really quarantined. Some people haven't, but if you have been, really try and build it in slowly so kids can get used to it and get comfortable with it. I can't say enough about routine. It's hard. I find it hard. Summer is coming and routine is even harder in the summer. But trying to build in some consistency. And even in this time of uncertainty, you may not know what's happening next week, but we can meet, every Sunday night as a family and say, okay, here's the schedule for the week, and here's who's picking you up, and here's who's dropping you off. And, don't forget you have, Tuesday and Thursday or your, so trying to really make sure kids understand, even if it's just week to week, what the routine is, what the schedule is, what they can expect. That sense of consistency and support is really important. Listening more than you talk. So, repeating what you're hearing if you're not sure how to do this well, one of the best tips I think I've ever gotten is just to repeat what you hear. So if a kid says, I'm sad, then say, I'm sad, and just nod your head a little bit and wait. Instead of saying, oh, you miss your friends and you're sad you haven't had a play date all year, don't just say you're sad. Or if they're saying, oh, my mask is so itchy, try not to say, oh, you must really hate wearing masks all day. This is so hard. Just say, I know your mask is itchy, huh? Just repeat back. And then if you pause, they'll come to you. So try that. And then with older kids, trying some simple phrases. What do you need right now? What do you need from me? Just giving them that opportunity. And the pause, just really giving that pause for them to share. It's really hard to not fill the silence. But I've noticed that keeping it simple and giving them that time to if you just say, what do you need? And just wait, sometimes you'll get an answer. So these are my tips, but for some kids, you need more. For some kids, that's not enough. And so Melissa's going to jump in and share a little bit about those kids who may be struggling and need a little bit more support than what I was talking about. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth touched on so many important points of how to listen to your kid and how to talk with them about how to manage stress and these many transitions we are constantly being faced with this year. And I'm here to talk a little bit about what happens if our kids are really, really struggling with the stress of this year and the many challenges that we've faced. Elizabeth, go ahead and advance the slide. Oh, there we go. So I start these conversations with an acknowledgement that we are still in the midst of a national crisis. And I really, really, really want to just make sure that we're remembering this as we're re-entering schools, as we're re-entering society, as we are getting our vaccinations and starting to slowly move forward with our lives. We are still in the midst of a international crisis. And that we are all fatigued, we're all tired, and our kids often feel it the most. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And for those of you who came to the winter conversation, you'll recognize one or two of these slides. We really need to acknowledge the challenges our kids and our families have faced this year. with the COVID-19 pandemic combined with really visible health disparities, social justice disparities, disruption, isolation, fear about our future, really leading to increased mental health needs within our community. And we're seeing those increased needs now in our mental health community, with the child mental health needs rising far above what we ever really anticipated they would. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And you'll recognize this again if you came in the wintertime. COVID-19 has impacted our kids and our teens in many ways. You might see some of these behaviors in some of your kids, or maybe in yourself. Fight, flight, and freeze responses are common stress reactions. So in the classroom, a flight response might look like withdrawing or avoiding work or skipping class or daydreaming, zoning out, or sleeping all day. A fight response might look like acting out or aggression or lots of silliness and hyperactivity. A freeze response could be the, oh, who cares about this? Why are we still talking about this? What's the point reactions, or giving a blame or a blank look, or feeling numb, disconnected, scrolling through social media all day, all the time. These are all normal reactions to such an abnormal year that we've had. And if you recognize some of these behaviors or feelings, it's because we're all experiencing them, normalize them. It is okay to have these feelings. But when we are seeing kids predominantly showing fight, flight, or freeze responses, or if you're noticing that within yourself, it's time to ask for help. I do want to note that many of our kids are doing okay. They're tolerating return to school. They are largely engaged and participating. They're deriving oftentimes a lot of pleasure from returning because they can see their friends. They're socializing. But some of our kids are struggling a little bit more. Go ahead, Elizabeth. So we all know that COVID-19 has impacted families and educators and parents as well. So this says invisible load of motherhood, but it really should say of parenthood, distant learning edition. And man, what a year it has been. I think Elizabeth was talking about how her kids have been upstairs learning independently. And my 2-year-old has been downstairs making messes in the sink and all over the house. And, I think this year has taught us how important school is in supporting everybody in the community, including our kids, but also our parents and our families. And we are all really thankful for the educators that we have in our lives. Go ahead, Elizabeth. So when I talk about kids and family members who may be struggling, we think about child mental health. And what do I mean by mental health? Well, mental health is a lot of things. It means ultimately having the capacity and the ability to successfully adapt to and respond to the challenges that life creates for people. And it's like many things on a spectrum. From people who have no distress or problem or disorder, and who might have periods of pensiveness or thoughtfulness or worry about am I going to get my homework done, or I've got that test tomorrow, I'm a little nervous about that, or when are we going to go back to school, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about this. But then you might see kids who struggle with mental distress, people who are feeling upset or annoyed or unhappy, glum, anxious, worried a lot. We start to get worried when that mental distress is longer than we would expect it would be, or more significant than we would expect it to be, or more impairing than we would expect it to be. And it starts to interfere with life. And when you see that mental distress interfering with the ability to get out of bed or get dressed or go to school or do your homework, or talk to your family or your friends, then we're starting to think about a mental health problem. And when it really starts to interfere with your life and you're starting to have a constellation of difficulties, you might think about mental illness or behavioral health challenge. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And so when we're looking at a behavioral health problem or a mental health problem, we're really looking at impairment in a couple different areas. We're looking at kids who might have difficulty with how they feel, trouble getting along with others and in their social relationships or family relationships, trouble completing tasks or doing work. And so they're acting differently or they're really, really impulsive. Um, People who have experienced significant life events and that have led to a big change in a usual functioning, which like, holy cow, that's most of us, right? But it's trouble adapting to that challenging or change in life event. And then we see challenges in thinking with lots of negative thoughts or stuck thoughts or thoughts of maybe I don't want to be here anymore, thoughts of harming yourself. That's when we start to think about mental health problems. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And just some fast facts. Half of all chronic mental illness begins by age 14. And 22% of our kids experience a serious mental illness in a given year. So in a classroom of 25, you'll find that 1 in 5 of those kids in a class of 25 are going to experience a mental health problem of moderate to serious impairment. And we often mistake these early signs of mental illness for typical child development or just a phase. And so we see a major delay between onset of symptoms and treatment, on average 10 years. And then our kids, especially our teens, start to try to self-medicate with drugs or alcohol. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And so if you are concerned, say something, talk to your school, go to your pediatrician or your nurse practitioner, talk to family members and friends who know your child, who know your family. And there's also a number of hotlines and websites and resources that we'll share later that can provide really helpful information. But if you have a concern, ask someone. See something, say something. It never hurts to ask. Go ahead, Elizabeth. When do I look for behavioral health care? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that during a breakout room, but Elizabeth, will you click for me? First off, are concerns that you have about your child interfering with daily life? So is your child so worried about being away from you that they're not attending school anymore? Are they so worried about performance on their exams that they're just not even trying to study anymore because they just say, what's the point? Are they so sad that it's hard to get out of bed in the morning and it's hard to see friends? So we're seeing concerns interfering with daily life. Are you fighting all the time with your kid? Elizabeth, will you click through a couple times for me? Thank you. So also, how long have concerns been going on? If you have severe concerns that have been lasting for 2 weeks or more, reach out, ask for help, because that's that duration of 2 weeks or more is where we start to get pretty concerned. And then how changeable is your child? You may make some changes in bedtime or changes in routines or in expectations for your child, or you might try some adaptations, take them out of the house a little bit more. And if concerns are the same and you've tried a number of things and things are getting worse, that's when you are going to want to reach out and try to talk to a professional. It is better to ask for help and not need it than to not ask at all. Go ahead, Elizabeth. So we know that mental illness impacts families the most. Our families are often pretty unprepared for kids' behavioral health challenges. The topic alone can be pretty loaded with stigma and blame and shame. And the path from onset of symptoms to diagnosis and then treatment and then acceptance of challenges for a child can be long, especially relevant to a child's age. If you think of a kid who might be struggling at age 8, waiting a year for treatment is 1/9 of a child's life, right? Challenges can impact the whole family. So when we think about a child who is depressed, number one presenting symptom for childhood depression is irritability. Guess who kids are irritable with? Usually us. And so our child behavioral health challenges can be really impactful on parents and on siblings too. Um, and as a result, our families can feel isolated and alone, like they don't know who to turn to. They may struggle with finding resources to help them cope. And in Rochester, we'll talk tonight during our breakout rooms, we can talk about ways to find a number of resources. We're pretty lucky in Rochester to have quite a few. But the impact on families can be pretty significant. Go ahead, Elizabeth. So what can you do as a parent? Um, Number one, talk with your kids about their mental health. And this could be dinner topics on mental health in general, like stress, anxiety, or common feelings or worries. But also talk with your kids about what they're feeling. Don't feel like you need to fix it. It's okay to say, "Hey, how you doing today? I've noticed that maybe you're feeling pretty anxious these days. What's up?" And let them talk. The car is a great place to talk with your teens, um, because they often like have something else to focus on, like the road, or can look away from you. Um, Go for walks with your kids, and talk to them about friends who've maybe struggled with mental health challenges. If you're worried that your kid is struggling with suicidal thoughts, ask them about them. The research really shows that talking about suicide and depression does not cause people to think about suicide and depression. It only reveals thoughts that are already there. So talk to your kids. And then trust your gut. You know your kid the best. And if you think your kid is struggling, or needs help, trust that feeling and ask people for that help until you find it, whether it's your pediatrician or your school or community mental health organizations. And be a role model. Show your kids that it's okay to talk about and care for their mental health by talking about and caring for your mental health. So if you need a break or a personal moment or a self-care moment to take care of mom or take care of dad, it's okay to say, "I need to take care of mom or dad tonight. I need a break. I'm going to go take a personal night." Or I'm going to go take a shower because that's how I take care of myself when I feel stressed. Ask for help when you need it. And we'll talk about options for treatment in our community. But I want you to remember that treatment for mental health is just like treatment from any other specialist. Just as you would receive treatment for a broken arm or for a fever or pink eye, you should receive help for mental health as well. And then remember, you're not alone in this. 1 in 5 kids experience a mental health condition. And so, you know what that means is that, like, in our group of 24 that we have here, we have at least 5. If let's say we have 24 unique families, we've got at least 5 families on this call. If it were a random sample, that's quite a lot. And we don't always talk about it. And then team up, build a team of professionals. That can include your school counselors, your educators, your softball coach. It can include professionals in the community. It can include faith leaders, but build a team and use them. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And then when you think about also how do you support your kids' mental health, what are the top things to do? If I had to choose, my top 3 would be to focus on getting enough exercise, getting enough sleep and rest, and helping your kid learn a couple basic relaxation and coping strategies. The research really shows that exercise and sleep are as effective for supporting kids' mental health as medication. And if we could bump up our exercise, we could actually reduce the need for medication in many kids. Many of our kids don't get adequate rest at night, and the more exhausted our kids are, the less regulated their feelings are going to be. Kids need a lot of sleep. 8 hours is actually an underestimate for many of our kids. They actually need between 10 and 12, depending on their age. And so if you're noticing that your child is struggling with emotional regulation, with tantrums, volatility, look at their sleep schedule. Try to get a little bit more sleep at night. And then in our breakout room, we'll talk a little bit about some coping strategies that you can use, but there are also some wonderful ones that are available online through Smiling Mind, or other online mindfulness resources, and also available at the Children's Institute. I think you guys have a great set of resources as well. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And then what do you say to your kids? I've noticed you've been sad a lot. Can we talk about it? Or that sounds tough. Here's some ways we've handled this in the past. What do you need right now? How can I help you find it? And you don't need to worry about having all the answers right away. Really take time to listen without judgment, and take concerns seriously, because if you can get it, if a kid gives you a glimmer into, or a glimpse into how they're feeling, believe them. All right, go for it. We're going to go through these last resources pretty quickly. They're mostly in here, so you guys can follow up on these resources at the end. If you want to go more in depth, we can talk about some of this in the breakout room. But there are a host of resources in our community. Reach out to family and friends. Your pediatrician is also often the #1 go-to for support when you're concerned about kids. Pediatricians in Rochester are particularly well educated about child mental health. So talk to them if you have any concerns. They can often connect you with resources. And then Pittsford has a also wealth of resources in their educators, their counselors, their psychologists, their social workers, and partnerships with community providers that can help support your kids and your families. And then within our community, Children's Institute has a host of tools, as well as some other resources, including United Way 211, which can provide really personalized support in navigating lots and lots of resources. Our office has tools for families, and there are also some excellent websites like Psychology Today to help identify private practitioners. Go ahead, Elizabeth. I'll have you click through these quickly, but for 211, this is our individualized coaching. They can provide you with crisis response resources, mobile crisis phone support. They're amazing, as well as connection to outpatient care. Go for it. And then will you click one more time? There are some other quick access options, including some walk-in hours at Rochester Regional and Catholic Family Center, as well as national helplines that you can call if you need help. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And then outpatient services that are available throughout Monroe County. All of these provide excellent clinic-based outpatient mental health resources and services. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And then our service provides care to kids from birth to age 18. And we have two main locations, 3 primary care locations, 4 school-based clinics. So you'll notice one of them is in Pittsford at Park Road Elementary School, and 1 satellite embedded in a community-based organization. So if you're connected with any of these, you can ask as well for additional resources. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And finally, remember your school team. They are here for you, and they can be a primary resource for you and your family in helping develop resilience and support your kids and support you guys as family members. So reach out to your school team because they're here for you. Go ahead. All right. Thank you all very much. I really, really enjoyed talking with you, and I can't wait to talk a little bit more in the breakout room.
Take me a second to get to the mute. I just thought this was perfect. One day you'll look back and realize how hard it was and just how well you did. So remember that you're doing a good job and you're doing your best. So I am going to stop sharing for now. So we did go a little over time, but I want to just give a chance if people have questions you want to ask in the group, or we can just go straight to our breakout rooms and have opportunity for some good discussion in the smaller groups. So if anybody has a pressing question or something you want to ask to the larger group, and otherwise we can just go to our breakout rooms and have some opportunity for discussion there. So Andrea is going to go ahead and put us, I guess, into groups. And we are not going to come back together in the large group. So we'll just use the breakouts as, as needed. And if we end early, you can end early. If they need to go a little longer, because we took up a little extra time, that's fine as well. So we should have about 40-ish minutes in the breakout rooms. So enjoy the conversation, and thank you so much for coming tonight. It was really great to have you all here.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Melissa. That was amazing. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms. If you are invited to one that doesn't seem like the one that you really were hoping to be a part of, just don't accept it and wait back with me for a moment, and I can make sure that you get to the one that you want to be in.